Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you'd hand them your entire life without question? That was me with my twin brother Mark. We shared everything, the same face, the same voice, even the same fingerprints. But what I didn't know was that Mark had been using our identical appearance as the perfect weapon against me. When federal agents knocked on my door at 6 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday morning in Chicago, accusing me of orchestrating a massive credit card fraud scheme, I thought it was some terrible mistake. It wasn't until I saw the security footage of me at locations I'd never been to, making transactions I'd never made, that I realized the horrifying truth. My own twin brother had been living a double life, and I was a scapegoat. But Mark made one crucial mistake. He forgot about the one video that would change everything. But before we begin, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're listening from. The sound of heavy knocking at 6:17 a.m. jolted me from sleep like a sledgehammer to the chest. Living in my small apartment in Lincoln Park, Chicago, I wasn't used to unexpected visitors, especially not at dawn. The October rain was beating against my windows, and the gray morning light barely illuminated my bedroom as I stumbled toward the front door. "Michael Chun, FBI." "Open the door." My blood turned to ice. "FBI?" I fumbled with the locks, my hands trembling as I tried to process what was happening. When I opened the door, 3 agents in dark suits stood before me, their faces stone-cold serious. The lead agent, a tall woman with sharp features, held up her badge. "Michael Chun, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit credit card fraud, identity theft, and money laundering," she announced, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "There has to be some mistake." I managed to stammer, my voice barely above a whisper. "I work at a marketing firm downtown. I don't know anything about credit card fraud." Agent Rodriguez, as she introduced herself, stepped forward with handcuffs. "Sir, we have extensive evidence linking you to a sophisticated credit card fraud operation that has stolen over $2.3 million from unsuspecting victims across the Midwest. You have the right to remain silent." As the cold metal closed around my wrists, my mind raced. This couldn't be happening. I was Michael Chun, a 28-year-old marketing coordinator who spent his evenings watching Netflix and his weekends hiking along Lake Michigan. The most illegal thing I'd ever done was jaywalking across Michigan Avenue during lunch breaks. They led me out of my building, past curious neighbors who had gathered in the hallway. Mrs. Patterson from 3B looked at me with a mixture of shock and disgust, her morning coffee trembling in her hands. The walk to their black SUV felt like a death march, each step echoing the destruction of my carefully built life. During the ride to the federal building downtown, I kept thinking about Mark. My twin brother and I had been inseparable growing up in suburban Naperville. We'd shared bedrooms, friends, even girlfriends sometimes, though never at the same time. But over the past year, something had changed between us. Mark had become distant, canceling our weekly dinners and avoiding family gatherings. When I'd asked him about it, he'd brushed off my concerns, claiming he was exploring new opportunities. The interrogation room was exactly like the ones you see in movies: sterile white walls, a metal table, and cameras in every corner. Agent Rodriguez sat across from me with a thick manila folder, her partner Agent Williams standing by the door like a sentinel. "Let's start simple, Michael," she began, opening the folder to reveal a stack of photographs. "Do you recognize any of these locations?" My heart nearly stopped. The photos showed security camera footage of someone who looked exactly like me. Same height, same build, same Asian features, even the same haircut. But this person was at a Best Buy in Milwaukee, a jewelry store in Indianapolis, and a high-end electronics shop in Detroit. Locations I'd never been to, making purchases with credit cards that weren't mine. "That's not me," I said, my voice cracking with desperation. "I've never been to any of these places. I was working during these timestamps. You can check with my employer." Agent Williams stepped forward, sliding another photograph across the table. This one showed the same figure walking into a Chase Bank branch, clearly visible on the security camera. The timestamp read 3 weeks ago, 2:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. "Funny thing is, Michael," Agent Rodriguez said, her tone sardonic, Your employer confirmed you took a personal day that Wednesday. No alibi for that time frame. The walls felt like they were closing in. Someone who looked exactly like me was committing these crimes, and I had no way to prove my innocence. The federal agents had forensic evidence, security footage, and even witness testimonies placing me at the scene of these crimes. "I want a lawyer," I finally managed to say, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. As they processed me through the system, fingerprints, mugshots, the works, one thought kept pounding in my head like a relentless drumbeat. There was only one person in the world who could pass for me so perfectly that even security cameras couldn't tell the difference. My identical twin brother, Mark. 3 days later, sitting in the Cook County Jail waiting for my bail hearing, I felt like I was living in someone else's nightmare. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on my frame, and the constant noise of the jail, shouting, clanging metal, distant conversations, had become a soundtrack to my destruction. My court-appointed attorney, David Kellerman, was a tired-looking man in his 50s who carried the weight of too many hopeless cases on his shoulders. When he visited me that Thursday afternoon, his expression told me everything I needed to know before he even spoke. "Michael, I'll be honest with you," he said, settling into the plastic chair across from me in the visiting room. "The evidence against you is overwhelming. They have you on security cameras at 7 different locations across 3 states, all making fraudulent purchases with stolen credit card information. But it's not me," I insisted for what felt like the 100th time. "I keep telling everyone, I have an identical twin brother. Mark could pass for me anywhere." David's expression softened slightly, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. "I understand you want to explore every avenue, but accusing your own brother of framing you, that's a serious allegation that would require substantial proof." He pulled out his tablet and showed me more security footage. This time, it was from a luxury car dealership in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The figure on camera looked so much like me that for a moment, I questioned my own memories. Same walk, same mannerisms, even the same nervous habit of running fingers through hair when thinking. "They're saying this operation was sophisticated," David continued. "Whoever was running it had access to high-level identity theft resources, fake IDs, and a network of people converting the stolen goods into cash. This isn't some petty crime, Michael. This is organized fraud at the federal level." That night, lying on the thin mattress in my cell, I couldn't stop thinking about Mark. We'd grown up as best friends, but also fierce competitors. In high school, we both tried out for the same baseball team. I made varsity, he got cut. In college, we'd both applied to Northwestern's business program. I got accepted, he was waitlisted, and ended up at a state school. Even in dating, there had always been an undercurrent of competition. But this, framing me for federal crimes? It seemed impossible, even for someone who had grown increasingly distant and bitter over the years. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Mark himself walked into the visiting room, wearing an expensive-looking charcoal suit I'd never seen before. His appearance shocked me. He looked healthier, more confident, like someone who had recently come into money. "Jesus, Michael," he said, sitting down across from me with what appeared to be genuine concern. "I came as soon as I heard. This is insane." Looking at him was like looking into a mirror, but something fell off. Maybe it was the way he avoided direct eye contact, or how his concerns seemed rehearsed rather than genuine. "Mark, I need you to tell me the truth," I said, leaning forward. "Where have you been the past few months? Where are these new opportunities you mentioned?" He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I've been consulting for some tech startups, doing freelance marketing work. Nothing illegal, if that's what you're implying. The FBI thinks I've been traveling all over the Midwest committing credit card fraud." I pressed. "You know, there's only one person who could impersonate me perfectly." Mark's face hardened. "Are you seriously accusing me of this?" "Your own brother." But as he spoke, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A small scar on his left hand that hadn't been there the last time I saw him. A fresh cut, maybe 2 weeks old, right where someone might injure themselves handling stolen merchandise or working with unfamiliar equipment. "Michael, I'm going to help you get through this," Mark said, standing up. "I'll hire you a better lawyer. I'll do whatever it takes. But I can't have you accusing me of something this serious." After he left, I sat in the visiting room for another 10 minutes, processing what had just happened. My own twin brother, the person who knew me better than anyone in the world, had looked me in the eye and lied. I was sure of it now, but knowing the truth and proving it were two entirely different things. My bail was set at $250,000, an impossible amount for someone with my modest savings and entry-level marketing job salary. Mark had promised to help, but days passed without any word from him. Meanwhile, the federal prosecutor's case against me grew stronger by the hour. David Kellerman returned with more devastating news. They've traced the money trail, Michael. The fraudulent purchases were being resold through an underground network, and the profits were being laundered through cryptocurrency exchanges. We're talking about a highly sophisticated operation. He spread out documents across the metal table in the jail's conference room. Bank records, transaction logs, and surveillance photos painted a picture of someone living a double life. Someone who looked exactly like me had been cashing in stolen credit cards for high-value electronics, jewelry, and luxury goods, then converting everything into untraceable digital currency. "Here's what I don't understand," David said, pointing to a timeline he'd constructed. "The operation shows signs of extensive planning. Whoever did this spent months setting up fake identities, establishing relationships with fences, and mapping out optimal locations for the thefts. This wasn't impulsive, it was calculated." That's when something clicked. Mark's sudden lifestyle changes over the past year weren't random. The expensive clothes, the new car I'd noticed in passing, his evasiveness about work. It all made sense now. "David, I need you to investigate my brother's finances," I said urgently. "Look for any unusual income, cryptocurrency transactions, anything that doesn't match his supposed consulting work." "Michael, I understand you're desperate, but—" "Please," I interrupted. "Mark and I are identical twins. We have the same height, weight, facial features, even similar mannerisms. If someone wanted to frame me for these crimes, he's the only person who could pull it off convincingly." David studied my face for a long moment. "All right, I'll look into it. But you need to understand, even if your brother has been involved in questionable activities, that doesn't automatically prove he framed you. We need direct evidence linking him to these specific crimes." That weekend, I got another visitor, my mother. At 58, Janet Chun had spent her entire life holding our family together. First as a single mother after my father left when we were 12, then as the mediator between two increasingly competitive sons. "Michael, honey," she said, her eyes red from crying, "I don't understand how this happened. You've always been the responsible one." "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest," I said. "Has Mark been acting strange lately? Different somehow?" She hesitated. "Well, he has seemed more secretive, and he's been spending money like he won the lottery. Last month, he bought me that expensive purse for my birthday, the Coach bag I mentioned wanting. It must have cost $400. Where did he say he got the money? Some big consulting contract with a tech company. He was vague about the details." She paused, studying my face. "Michael, you don't really think Mark would?" "I don't know what to think anymore, Mom. But someone who looks exactly like me has been committing these crimes, and Mark is the only person who fits that description." After she left, I spent hours in my cell trying to remember every interaction I'd had with Mark over the past year. The canceled dinners, the avoided phone calls, the times he'd asked me detailed questions about my work schedule and daily routines. At the time, I thought he was just being a caring brother. Now, those conversations took on a sinister new meaning. The breakthrough came on Monday morning. David rushed into our meeting with an expression I hadn't seen before. Actual hope. "Michael, I've been digging into your brother's finances like you asked," he said, pulling out a laptop. "And I found something interesting. 3 months ago, Mark opened a new bank account and started making large cash deposits. Tens of thousands of dollars, all in small bills. He showed me bank statements that made my head spin. In just 3 months, Mark had deposited over $180,000 in cash across multiple accounts. But here's the really interesting part," David continued. "I cross-referenced these deposit dates with the timeline of the credit card fraud operation. Every major deposit corresponds with a spike in fraudulent activity. For the first time since my arrest, I felt like I could breathe. This proves Mark was involved in the operation. It suggests he was involved in something lucrative and probably illegal, David corrected. But we still need to prove he was specifically committing the crimes you're accused of and that he deliberately framed you for them. What about security footage from the banks where he made these deposits? If we can show Mark making deposits around the same times the crimes were committed, that would establish a pattern. David nodded slowly. That's actually not a bad idea. Let me see what I can subpoena. As I sat in my cell that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in days: hope. My own brother had betrayed me in the worst possible way, but maybe, just maybe, I could prove it. The next 2 weeks crawled by like months. David worked tirelessly to build our defense, subpoenaing bank records, security footage, and anything else that might prove Mark's involvement in the fraud operation. Meanwhile, I learned to navigate jail politics and try to maintain my sanity in an environment designed to break people down. My cellmate, a guy named Tommy who was awaiting trial for tax evasion, became an unexpected ally. "Man, your story is wild," he said one evening as we sat on our bunks. "Your own twin brother setting you up? That's some biblical-level betrayal right there." "The worst part is that everyone thinks I'm crazy for even suggesting it," I replied. "Who would believe that someone would frame their own brother?" "People do crazy things for money," Tommy said. "And if your brother was making the kind of cash your lawyer mentioned, he had serious motivation to keep the operation going." That's when I remembered something that made my heart race. "Tommy, what if there was video evidence of Mark admitting to the crimes? Something he didn't know was being recorded?" "That would be game over for him," Tommy said. "But where would you find something like that?" I thought back to a family barbecue at my mother's house 3 months ago. It was one of the last times Mark and I had been in the same place for an extended period. I remembered him acting strange that day, taking multiple phone calls and stepping away from the group. But more importantly, I remembered my mother's security system. 2 years ago, after a break-in her neighborhood, Mom had installed a comprehensive security system with cameras covering the entire backyard and patio area. She'd mentioned that the system stored footage for 6 months before automatically deleting it. When David visited the next day, I could barely contain my excitement. "David, I need you to contact my mother immediately," I said. "She has a security system at her house that might have recorded conversations between Mark and me at a family gathering 3 months ago." "Michael, even if we found such footage, conversations between you and your brother probably wouldn't be admissible in court. Spousal privilege doesn't extend to siblings." "But what if the footage showed Mark making phone calls about the operation, or admitting to something while he thought no one could hear him?" David's expression shifted. That could be significant. If he made incriminating statements while unaware he was being recorded, that might be admissible. The next day felt like the longest of my life. David had gotten a court order to preserve the security footage from my mother's house, and a team of FBI technicians was reviewing months of recordings. I try not to get my hopes up, but it was impossible to focus on anything else. At 4:30 p.m., David burst into the jail conference room with an expression I'd never seen before: pure triumph. "Michael, we found it," he said, setting up his laptop with shaking hands. "Your mother's security system captured something extraordinary." The video showed the backyard of my childhood home during the barbecue on July 15th. I could see myself flipping burgers on the grill while Mark stood about 20 feet away, talking on his phone. The audio was clear enough to make out most of the conversation. "No, I told you, it has to be perfect," Mark was saying into his phone. "If anyone suspects it's not actually Michael making these purchases, the whole thing falls apart." My blood ran cold as I watched my brother continue the conversation. The beauty of it is that he's so predictable. Works late every Tuesday, goes hiking every Saturday morning. I've got his schedule memorized, so I know exactly when I can use his identity without anyone being able to place him somewhere else. The person on the other end of the call must have asked a question because Mark laughed, a sound that made my stomach turn. He won't suspect anything until it's too late. By the time the feds figure out what's happening, all the evidence will point straight to him. And who's going to believe that his own twin brother set him up? The video continued for another minute, with Mark discussing specific details about upcoming jobs and talking about how much money they were making. When it ended, The conference room was silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat. "This is it," David said quietly. "This is the evidence we need." But as relief washed over me, I felt something else, a deep, profound sadness. My twin brother, the person I'd shared everything with for 28 years, had deliberately and methodically destroyed my life for money. The betrayal cut deeper than any legal consequences ever could. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we take this to the prosecutor and demand that all charges against you be dropped," David said. "And then Mark is going to have some very difficult questions to answer." The wheels of justice moved quickly once we had the video evidence. Within 48 hours, all charges against me were dropped, and federal agents were executing search warrants on Mark's apartment and financial records. I was released from jail on a Thursday morning, stepping into the Chicago sunlight as a free man for the first time in 3 weeks. But freedom felt hollow. My job at the marketing firm was gone. They'd terminated me the day after my arrest, despite my protests of innocence. My apartment had been searched and essentially destroyed by federal agents looking for evidence. Most crushing of all, the brother I'd trusted with my life was facing the same charges that had nearly destroyed me. David drove me to the federal building downtown, where Agent Rodriguez was waiting with an update on Mark's arrest. "We executed the warrant at 6 a.m. this morning," she told us in her office. "Your brother's apartment was like a command center for the fraud operation. Multiple laptops, fake IDs, and over $80,000 in cash hidden in a safe behind his bedroom closet." She showed me photographs from the search. Mark's apartment, which I'd visited just 6 months ago, had been transformed into something unrecognizable. Computer equipment covered every surface, and the walls were covered with maps marking optimal locations for credit card fraud across the Midwest. "But here's the most damning evidence," Agent Rodriguez continued, pulling out a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a driver's license with my photo and personal information, but showing Mark's current address. "He was literally living as you," she said. "We found 3 separate sets of identification documents, all with your name and photo, but connected to accounts and addresses he controlled." The scope of Mark's betrayal was staggering. He hadn't just used our identical appearance to commit crimes. He'd systematically stolen my identity and built an entire criminal operation around impersonating me. "Where is he now?" I asked. "Federal holding facility. He'll be arraigned tomorrow morning." That evening, I sat in my destroyed apartment, surrounded by the aftermath of the FBI search, trying to process everything that had happened. My phone had been ringing constantly, reporters, family members, former colleagues, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. How do you explain to people that your own twin brother tried to destroy your life? My mother called around 8 p.m., her voice broken with grief and confusion. "Michael, I've been watching the news," she said. "They're saying Mark was behind everything. I don't understand how this happened." "Mom, I don't understand it either," I replied honestly. "I keep trying to figure out when Mark changed, when he became someone capable of this." "He came by the house this afternoon, before the arrest," she said quietly. "He was acting strange, panicked. He asked me to delete the security camera footage from the barbecue. He said it was important for family privacy." "Did you tell him you'd already given it to the FBI?" "Yes." The look on his face. She paused, crying softly. "He looked at me like I was his enemy. My own son looked at me with hatred because I helped prove his guilt." The next morning, I attended Mark's arraignment. Sitting in the federal courthouse, watching my identical twin brother stand before a judge in an orange jumpsuit felt surreal. When Mark glanced back at the gallery and saw me, his expression shifted through surprise, anger, and finally, something that might have been regret. His court-appointed attorney entered a plea of not guilty, but everyone in that courtroom knew the evidence against him was overwhelming. The same surveillance footage that had convinced everyone of my guilt now proved Mark's crimes. The same bank records that had implicated me now showed his systematic theft and money laundering. After the hearing, Mark's attorney approached me in the hallway. "Mr. Chun, my client would like to speak with you," he said. "He's expressed interest in explaining his actions, possibly as part of a plea negotiation." "I don't think that's a good idea," David interjected quickly, but I found myself nodding. "I'll see him." I need to understand why. The federal holding facility visiting room was identical to the one I'd sat in just days before. When Mark was brought in, wearing shackles and an orange jumpsuit, I barely recognized him. The confidence and smugness he displayed during our last meeting had been replaced by exhaustion and what looked like genuine remorse. "Michael," he said, sitting down across from me. "I'm sorry. Sorry. I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. You systematically destroyed my life. You stole my identity and tried to send me to federal prison for crimes you committed. And you're sorry." Mark looked down at his hands. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. When I first got involved with these guys, it was just supposed to be small-time stuff. Use fake IDs to buy electronics, flip them for cash. But it spiraled out of control. When did you decide to frame me?" "When the operation got too big and the FBI started investigating," he said quietly. "My partner said we needed a fall guy, someone to take the blame if things went wrong. And I suggested." He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. "You suggested your own brother," I said. "Your twin brother who trusted you completely." "I convinced myself it would never actually happen," Mark continued. "I thought we'd shut down the operation before anyone got caught. But then the investigation intensified, and they said it was either you or all of us. So you chose me." Mark finally looked up, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I chose me. I was a coward, and I chose to save myself instead of protecting you. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life." We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Mark spoke again. "I'm going to plead guilty to all charges," he said, "and I'm going to testify about exactly how I framed you. Make sure there's no doubt about your innocence." "That doesn't undo what you did to me," I replied. "I know, but it's the only thing I can do now to try to make this right." As I left the federal facility that day, I realized that while I'd been exonerated of all legal charges, the emotional damage would take much longer to heal. Mark wasn't just my brother. He'd been my best friend, my closest confidant, and the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. That trust was gone forever. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, working on rebuilding my life from scratch. The federal charges had been completely dropped, and Mark was serving a 12-year sentence in federal prison after pleading guilty to all counts. But legal vindication and personal healing were two very different things. The aftermath of the case had been almost as challenging as the original arrest. My story had become a media sensation. "Twin brother frames, identical twin for federal fraud," was the kind of headline that captured national attention. For weeks, I couldn't leave my apartment without being approached by reporters or curious strangers. The job search had been brutal. Despite being completely exonerated, many employers were hesitant to hire someone whose name was associated with a major federal fraud case. It took 4 months and dozens of interviews before I found a position with a small marketing firm in Milwaukee that was willing to look past the headlines and focus on my actual qualifications. My relationship with my mother had slowly begun to heal. She'd blamed herself for not seeing Mark's transformation earlier, for not protecting both of her sons from this disaster. It took months of family therapy before we could have a normal conversation without the specter of Mark's betrayal hanging over us. "I keep thinking about when you boys were little," she said during one of our weekly phone calls. "You were so protective of each other. If one of you got hurt, the other one would cry just as hard." "I don't understand when that changed." "I don't think it changed gradually, Mom," I replied. "I think Mark made a series of calculated decisions that led him further and further away from who he used to be. And by the time he was planning to frame me, he'd already become someone I didn't recognize." The hardest part wasn't the practical challenges of rebuilding my life. It was learning to trust again. The person who had known me best in the world, who had shared my childhood and understood my fears and dreams, had used that intimate knowledge to destroy me. How do you open yourself up to new relationships when your own brother had betrayed you so completely? My therapist, Dr. Sarah Martinez, helped me understand that Mark's actions reflected his character, not mine. "You made yourself vulnerable because you loved and trusted your brother," she said during one of our sessions. "That vulnerability wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. Mark's choice to exploit that trust was his moral failure, not yours." One autumn afternoon, I received an unexpected letter from Mark. I'd refused all his previous attempts to contact me, but something about this envelope, simple white paper with my name written in his familiar handwriting, made me open it. "Michael," it began, "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I'm not writing this letter to seek absolution. I'm writing because I want you to know that I understand the magnitude of what I did to you. For the past 6 months, I've had time to think about who I became and how I got there. The money, the lifestyle, the thrill of the operation. None of it was worth destroying our relationship and nearly ruining your life. But more than that, I've realized that framing you wasn't just about saving myself from legal consequences. Part of me was jealous of your life, your success, your integrity. And in a moment of cowardice and resentment, I decided to tear down everything you'd built. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to ever want to see me again. But I need you to know that every day I think about the brother I used to have and the relationship I destroyed with my own hands. I hope you're rebuilding your life and finding happiness again. You deserve better than what I did to you, and you deserve better than a brother like me. Mark." I read the letter 3 times before putting it away. Part of me appreciated his acknowledgement of the damage he'd caused, but it didn't change anything fundamental. The brother I'd loved and trusted was gone, replaced by someone who had systematically planned my destruction. A year after my release from jail, I met Sarah Chun, no relation, despite the shared surname, at a coffee shop near my office. She was a forensic accountant who had worked on white-collar crime cases and understood the complexities of financial fraud better than most people. When I eventually told her my story, she didn't look at me with pity or suspicion. She looked at me with respect for surviving such a profound betrayal. "The fact that you're sitting here, rebuilding your life, and still capable of trust says everything about your character," she told me on our 3rd date. "A lot of people would have become bitter and cynical after what you went through. Some days I am bitter and cynical, I admit it. But I realized that if I let Mark's betrayal turn me into someone suspicious and closed off, then he'd have stolen more than just a year of my life. He'd have stolen who I am as a person." On a cold December morning, exactly 18 months after my arrest, I received a call from Agent Rodriguez. Mark had been killed in federal prison, stabbed during a fight with other inmates. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mark had chosen a life of crime to avoid consequences, and those consequences had ultimately found him anyway. I didn't attend his funeral. My mother asked me to come, to help her say goodbye to the son she'd lost long before his actual death. But I couldn't bring myself to stand over the grave of someone who had tried so hard to destroy my life. Instead, I spent that day hiking along Lake Michigan, thinking about the brother I'd once known and mourning the relationship that had died long before Mark did. 2 years later, I'm engaged to Sarah and working as a senior marketing coordinator for a renewable energy company in Milwaukee. The federal fraud case occasionally comes up in background checks or conversations with new colleagues, but it no longer defines my life. I've learned that surviving betrayal isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It's about choosing to build something new from the pieces that remain. Sometimes late at night, I still think about Mark and wonder what would have happened if he'd made different choices. If he'd come to me when the fraud operation started spiraling out of control, I would have helped him find a way out. If he'd trusted me instead of betraying me, we might still be brothers today. But those are questions without answers. And I've learned that healing means accepting the reality of what happened rather than clinging to fantasies of what might have been. Mark made his choices, and I've made mine. The difference is that my choices led to rebuilding and growth, while his led to destruction and death. The video that saved my life is stored in an FBI evidence vault somewhere, a permanent record of the moment my brother chose money over family. But the real evidence of who I am isn't captured in any recording. It's in the life I've built since then, the relationships I've formed, and the choice to remain open to trust and love despite everything I've been through. My name is Michael Chun, and I survived my twin brother's ultimate betrayal. But more importantly, I chose to thrive in spite of it. If you like this story, leave your opinion in the comments and, of course, leave a like and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Big hug, and see you soon.